I've got huge respect for founders that actually build out. And obviously, I recognize their superpower. So you're starting out as a hacker pretty much. But it's sort of a lot of times it prevents people from making that first step of building or starting out. Let's build it up. Take something out of your imagination and put it into code.
Yeah.
Without thinking too much of.
Hey, I'm Al, and this is the Paglalayag podcast. I'm using this podcast to showcase what's going on around me in the clean tech and hardware space dito sa Filipinas. These next few episodes will introduce you to some high-powered social and technology entrepreneurs and balik scientists. While this is a business channel, I'm mostly going to keep things at a personal level and avoid talking too much about numbers. I hope you will find this cast of characters as impressive and inspiring as I do. So, tuloy-tuloy lang. Let's get into it. Okay, let's do this. Welcome everybody to Paglalayag. I'm Al, and today I'm joined by Jay Fajardo. So Jay Fajardo is a bit of a fixture in the Philippine scene here. After Airborne Access is sort of the first real successful venture, which was doing wireless hotspots around the NCR, kind of in the mid-2000s, I think, right?
That's right. We started in 2002.
Okay.
And it was actually nationwide.
Yeah.
By the time we got acquired.
And then from there into Launch Garage with Plug and Play founder Jojo Flores for another several years, and now just this year became the executive director of Ideaspace and QBO. So thank you very much for joining me today, and looking forward to it.
Yeah. Oh, you missed out just after I sold Airborne Access. That's when they started Proudcloud.
Proudcloud, right?
Yeah, which is a software development firm that I had, which is still running.
Yeah. And Founders Garage is still running also, right?
Launch Garage is still running. Jojo is running it now. But I remember right after Airborne Access getting acquired, I really wanted to get back to my coding roots. That's why I set up Proudcloud. And that's where I learned Rails in 2009. Yeah,
I mean, that was sort of one of the things that I was excited to get on the podcast and talk to you about. Because you've spoken to me about how you'd consider yourself more as a maker's sort of founder, whereas like Jojo Flores, for example, was much more of a finance guy. So like, how would you describe like a maker's startup builder, or like a startup builder in that way?
Well, I guess it's a founder that's equipped or skilled to build stuff, whether it's software or hardware. So you're starting out as a hacker pretty much. I actually taught myself how to code in 1983 as a 15-year-old high school student. And that's where I started my entrepreneurial journey. In fact, I had this ambition or dream of having software being distributed by a software distributor or a software vendor. Like for a software publisher. Yeah. I started coding on a ZX81, which is a 2K machine. It had 2K, which means it had 2K of RAM. And
right.
Our storage was pretty much a cassette tapes.
Mm-hmm.
And I sold my first software program about a year after that, maybe.
In high school?
Oh, wow. to a software vendor for that particular machine, the ZX81. And that's when I decided that this is pretty much what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life.
Right.
Prior to that, though, I was into electronics, typical popular electronics, building out a lot of stuff. But since then, pre-internet, I've been software consulting for multiple SMEs and big enterprise, building out software systems, both small and large, until the internet happened.
And did you go to De La Salle? Because that's where I met you. You're an alumnus.
I went to La Salle. I went to La Salle for high school and college.
Okay.
I actually went to, I took computer science.
Mm-hmm.
I was the second batch of computer science ever in La Salle. But I shifted because I was already building stuff, and then I had a company that consulted for software. I took the night school, which was a business management program, so that I could still work and do my thing.
And you've been very motivated to do this for a long time. I was sort of guessing that Airborne Access wasn't your first time trying to do a serious business. You had already done it a couple times and sold.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, not sold. Just maybe I've started a couple. Some have just died natural deaths.
Right.
But
sold software at least.
Oh yeah.
If not necessarily the business. Right.
Definitely. The funny thing was when the internet came, I had joined a company called Business World Online, which is a spin-off of the Business World publication, which used to be a newspaper.
Yep.
And we spun off an online division because that's when people started going to the web, building out their newspapers on the web. And I built a search engine for the archives. They contracted me actually to build out a search engine, an online search engine for their archives, pre-internet, in the model of CompuServe and maybe Delphi and Providence. But once the internet came out, I joined them as technology director. We started building on the web instead.
Right.
So I taught myself how to code in obviously HTML and Perl. Then JavaScript came out. So the first iterations of JavaScript, Java. I never really liked Java.
Like compiling.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's really messy. But so I built out that search engine called Codex. And later, after that, I got into internet telephony. So it's more on the hardware side, building out networks across Southeast Asia and Asia, which eventually, as everybody knows, it replaced the PSTN, old circuit switch telephone network. Now it's all digital, IP telephony.
Yeah, voice over IP.
Yeah, so that's what I was doing until about 2002 when I started there. Yeah.
Cool. So I've met Katrina Chan, the outgoing executive director, one time in like 2018. So I don't know her well, but my impression is that she probably wouldn't call herself a builder or a maker style of executive director. What do you think the startup community can look forward to, like coming out of QBO and Ideaspace in these coming years?
By virtue of me being a builder as well.
Yeah, like just as a different style, I guess.
It is, and I think it's a big asset for me to be from the founder space going into this role, because I've got huge empathy for founders that we work with.
The grind.
Yeah.
The climb.
And I've got huge respect for founders that actually build out. And obviously I recognize their superpower, which is to build. Then I used to give talks about code and making. And I said that's really a superpower because you can actually think of something and then just go ahead and build it up. A lot of people, we take that for granted, us builders, makers. But over the years, I've seen a lot of founders out there that have no skill of building. They have to look for an engineer to build out their vision and their idea. And that's super difficult. It's super difficult.
Yeah, it takes a real development of like kind of organizational maturity and stuff to be getting. I mean, in some ways, ChatGPT and things like that are sort of helping people develop requirements without having to go through. But still, just to get an idea into something that is actually a set of steps to go through. And
that's why if you're a software developer, it's easier for you to back together an MVP. Mm-hmm. It'll take you 24 hours maybe come out with a nice MVP. That's why I tell some founders, for a while I told them, why don't you just teach yourself how to code and you can build it yourself.
Yeah.
And recently you've got no code, you've got low code, you've got no code. And it's become easier for founders to actually build something out without, having to go through the grind of learning a language or a framework.
Mm-hmm. But I'm sure you would agree that learning a language is a wonderful thing to do just for your own development as a person as well.
Absolutely.
Computer language, human language.
For sure. I mean, when I first learned how to code all those years ago, it was magic for me that I could actually instruct the computer to do certain things that would manifest itself when you run the program. Another skill that I recognized that I had developed, especially when I was getting into databases and data structures, so that I could imagine data in my head, how it would actually move around in a computer system, and how it would be stored in the different data structures.
Or even more broadly, like an organization.
Right. That gave me a lot of satisfaction because it was sort of like being able to imagine and orchestrate data moving around in ecosystems. Um, Later, when I started working with frameworks like Rails, which had a lot of focus on elegance and code elegance, and efficiency and beautiful code, I had elevated my appreciation for it up to that level. So
Right.
it's a new thing. It's like being able to refactor is a win. Nice refactoring wins are super gratifying.
Yeah, that I don't know whose quote this is, but like being able to write code that a machine understands is a mark of a good programmer, but being able to write it so a human understands as well is like
Exactly.
that higher level
Exactly.
of elegance and stuff.
That's right.
Ruby has always been one language that has gone like really
Took that extra step.
yeah really made a big deal out of it.
Right.
and as users we appreciate it. So
Right.
for sure. So yeah, I think I mean. You've also talked to me about sort of somehow a little bit, I don't know if this is right to call it nostalgia of like the ethos of the community in some of those earlier days when open source was really what people valued, had a very strong opinions about and conviction about doing and building. Whereas what you're seeing more recently with the kind of the current generation of programmers that you're seeing coming through, it tends to be people that are learning languages because they're tools for a job, they're getting a job, they're participating in competitions and stuff like that, rather than sort of like wanting to contribute to this broader project with this grander vision. Would you maybe try to expand on that a little bit?
Sure. When I started out Rails around 2009, I got, and even before that, I got exposed to open source, obviously.
Yeah.
But started to become super compelling to me around that time, because then you could see community really building out stuff for the sake of elevating or providing a solution in a much more altruistic manner with altruism in mind. Nothing commercial. It's more delivering value and using the power of the community to efficiently build it out and to tap into not just one, 5 or 10 brains to deliver a product, but to tap into maybe even hundreds of contributors. And that for me is a formula for delivering technology or access to technology to the world in general, the rest of the world. And I'm a huge believer in that. So much so that one of my talks in LaSalle, the talk where I met you, you had a booth, right? And I was on stage talking about intellectual property.
Right.
And I was among a bunch of scientists, people from the USD and DTI.
Yeah, it's their annual DiTech fair.
Right.
I actually had the booth the previous year.
Okay.
I was just as a visitor this
So
year.
we're talking about IP. We're talking about IP coming out of schools, IP coming out of the Philippines. And there was a lot of focus on the original IP owner wanting to protect it so that nobody steals it. And for me, that sort of like leads to it being, sometimes it gets stifled from being brought out into the world so that the rest of mankind can take advantage of it. There's too much focus on commercialization, selling it and protecting it. If it's not going to be, if no one's going to buy this, if I can make money off it, no one's going to use it. That type of mentality. So I actually gave a very controversial proposition on the same stage. We said, hey, why don't you just open source it? And just like, medicine, if it's going to save mankind, if it's going to have a huge impact on humanity, open sourcing it would actually exponentially amplify the reach and the effectivity.
Yeah, I think there are some open source projects when it comes to like genomes and stuff like that, right?
Yes,
like when universities are doing genome mapping of like native seeds and stuff like that, they'll often elect to put those into an open source license.
Sure. I think it's a great model. It's a great model for the furtherance of progress as a whole. I mean, I understand that people need to make money, people need to exploit the commercial success of these things, but end of the day, you're a builder, you're a scientist, you start out with a very idealistic objective, which is to make mankind better.
Yeah. And some projects are better suited to it than others. Like, have you seen any Filipino open source projects that kind of stand out as notable? over the years?
None.
None.
Not
Okay.
really. I guess it's also a function of our economy. I mean, people have to
It's
eat.
Yeah, to be an open source to do an open source project is like sort of you have to be in some level of luxury.
Yeah.
And in the cases of guys like Linus Torvalds, creator of Linux, like it's a position of luxury of like just extreme technical expertise in this area that
Right.
is very hard won
Sure.
like
But that's a nice thing about Rails, for example.
yeah.
The ecosystem allowed people like us to build out open source projects in small chunks, small sizes, like creating a gem.
Yeah.
That's an open source effort.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take too much. It's not a huge system, but it helps people out. It actually supported that type of behavior, and that's why I liked it. However, I've seen generations of developers that have come out after that have lost the desire, not just to do maybe work on their day job, but at the same time try to
Yeah.
participate in some kind of open source project on the side.
To become like a code poet as
Yeah.
DHH Rails.
Right.
That was the title of his talk earlier this year.
Nice. Yeah.
He actually had a surprisingly hilarious take on Twitter, because Twitter started out as a Rails app, and then when they started needing to like get higher performance and stuff, they started changing languages and going into this other like more sophisticated architecture.
Right.
And there's some engineers from that time that's saying that they feel that they lost a lot by going off and going to the microservices.
Uh-huh.
And
Okay.
and basically his takeaway, and I'm sure there's plenty of people that would disagree with him, but his takeaway is that then for the next 10 years they did basically nothing. They
Right.
did not move the product forward in any meaningful way, and still became this monster of a company.
Right.
And wouldn't we all like the promise of Rails being like the single founder to IPO sort of
Right.
possibility?
Absolutely, yes.
And wouldn't we all like to be able to find ourselves in a position where we can just make no progress for 10 years and still be that kind of...
I don't know. Maybe. Who knows? We'll know when we get there, right?
Yeah. I mean, anytime you're starting something up, you don't know what
Yeah. Well, another thing that I thought that contributed to that was really that whole architecture change. I know it's very efficient, certain in most cases. I see the value in microservices and all that, but it's sort of like I also felt bad when people started breaking up their domain expertise to front end and back end. We used to be all full stack,
Right.
all the way to DevOps. And when you're a full stack developer, you really have the ability to create a product and roll it out.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to look for a front end expert. You don't have to look for a back end expert.
Yeah.
You don't have to look for a DevOps guy. We all knew how to do it from the start.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of how Rails was successful in creating all these rapid applications developers building out products, on by themselves. I know that DHH is trying to push now the narrative where it's time to bring that back.
Mm-hmm.
It's the perfect time to make that happen. With all the layoffs and stuff, you've got idle tech talent out there
Yeah.
who are a big source of possible future ventures.
Yeah.
And Rails should be able to do that full stack. I'm hoping that picks up again.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I encourage people towards it just because it gives you so much that you can learn with less effort. A lot of the underlying technology that you would eventually have to learn if you're going to make like a real high-powered machine, you don't have to think about it at the time. You can just use this pleasant language that's just nice to work with, and like they went out of their way to make it pleasant to work with
Right.
as a coding style. So you can always go back to it. If you want to go for more power, Go and all these different things that have the promise of whether it's performance or reliability or what have you, then you can do it. You're going to be dealing with the same underlying technologies.
Right.
So I definitely encourage people, if you're going to get started with Ruby, and
Right.
you can always go into other stuff later.
I've seen some developers now that when they try to build out the product, they overthink the architecture from day one. I know it's good practice, right? Technical debt and all that, but it's sort of a lot of times it prevents people from making that first step of building or starting out. Let's build it out. Take something out of your imagination and put it into code.
Yeah.
Without thinking too much of how's it gonna serve 1 million users? So
Yeah.
build it first, man. I mean, have 5 users or 10 users. Find value in it before you start thinking about scaling. Because if you're good, then you should be able to fix that.
There was a fellow, I don't know if you were familiar with Chef. Chef was like a DevOps sort of orchestration tool. I remember watching that guy's talk back before I could write apps. I was still learning. I'm still trying to sort my way through what all of this stuff is and what to do with it. I knew I liked testing and the kind of promise behind test-driven development, so I was getting into the DevOps before I could do a lot of coding stuff. But his line during his talk was, "You don't have a scaling problem until you do, but you don't have a scaling problem." Like as a thing to be saying to the vast majority of people learning how to code, like I can assure you, you don't have a scaling problem.
That's right. I mean, overthinking, this whole thing. You're right. Yeah. And he was right.
So, I mean, no great open source foundational or like case studies to talk of from the Philippines to date. Do you have any thoughts on what might be a candidate for open source for this country?
Good question. Maybe something that people could actually easily adopt, something that's widely used, maybe. That's a good example. Personally, I've had some projects that I built for maybe some clients or for our company. And for one reason or another, they failed. And I'd say, why don't you just open source this? Because I still have the code. Because the client no longer needs it. And then let's push it to open source. There are a bunch of things I've built that I wanted to do to make that open source. Like, for example, a cryptocurrency wallet that we built out over NEM.
Okay.
We've got the code. I'm sure if I open source it, people would benefit from it. And all the underlying infrastructure that we built around it. That might be it. That might be one. We also have an old version of our telehealth platform.
What platform?
Telehealth.
Right. Okay.
With a medical journal and all that. That might be of use to some people when you imagine it. For more mundane projects, maybe payroll. A lot of people are looking for payroll all the time. Human resource hiring, but I'd say not even think about those big monoliths. Try to open source. Start with gems. Start with the API interfaces. Start with SDK. Start with integration with OpenAI, for example. Build out a better interface or middleware.
It's a great way to build your kind of street cred with people if you can always just point to the projects.
That's right. One of the things that we started to do early on at Proudcloud was I told them when you get applicants, ask for their GitHub account. That's a big filter already. If you don't have a GitHub account, or whatever nowadays, you get GitLab and all that. You shouldn't be able to get into our company, right? I mean, not just for the open source cred, but having had a GitHub account is one layer. If I go into it and I see you've been contributing to open source projects, or you've got your own open source project or whatever, then obviously you've got a 10x chance of getting into the company. It also indicates the philosophy of the attitude of the developer or the applicant.
Yeah, or personality even. Like, where are you spending your free time? Like, or maybe not free time, but study time, or like.
Or not even. It's an important part. It's an important thing for him to have an open source project. That means he's actually gone through that thought process of doing something altruistic with his skills. And then you can have a next level type of conversation with him.
Yeah.
So now you're talking on a different level. He's not just a worker. He's not there for the job. You can actually talk about grander things. And then if you got 10 more of those types of people in the same organization, then you can suddenly achieve great things. You can all together move in building something much more substantial than just work.
Yeah, it sort of demonstrates that you've got some amount of drive in a direction that like makes sense for you. Like,
right.
Right. Because if you're always just waiting to be told what to do, that is not necessarily the easiest person to have on the team.
Right. Exactly.
Even if they're very good, but they're just always waiting to be told. And
Yeah.
there's always stuff. There's always problems like code bases that like need to be updated and stuff.
Right.
They're the ones in the code, so that proactivity is valuable.
And if you go off and do your own project or you do your own startup, now we used to encourage that. If you're going to leave us, we'd really be very happy if you're leaving us because you were starting your own company or your startup. Right. So that's, I think there have been generations of developers that have emerged since 2000, since 2010, since 2011. That sort of like they've diluted that attitude, that philosophy. People are just learning to build for work rather than build for themselves.
Right. Or some kind of other contribution. Do you think, how much of that would you attribute to sort of market cycles or things going up and down? Because I'm sure you've been through a few ups and downs.
Oh yeah, I guess it's also a victim of the high demand for tech talent, and that was very evident in the past 10 years maybe.
The days of ZIRP.
Yeah, ZIRP.
Zero interest rates.
Yeah. So tech talent was so much in demand, and it peaked during the pandemic when everybody overhired. Everybody overhired, and then that sort of like created a bubble. Tech talent. Suddenly they all just laid off all these people. So during those days, it was really tough for people to have that attitude to do open source because, number one, you were probably building for two developers rather than just you. And because of the demand, it kept on moving from one company to another. You weren't able to sort of like build that foundational attitude where you learn this particular architecture, this philosophy, or work with this particular type of database. Because you had to just shift from one framework to another, different. So I guess that's it. It was a big one now that you mentioned it. But now we've got an opportunity for the code poets to show up.
A bit of a reset.
Right, a reset. So you got code poets now, and I'm looking forward for these guys to emerge. But you need, for that to happen, you need somebody to lead the charge. People like DHA, the coders of that generation.
Yeah. Well, it's inspiring to see them still going.
Yeah.
And the community grows, and for them to still be running with the same conviction that they have.
And they've got some. You've got some evangelists, like that lady from what's that company out of Boston, developer in this shop out of Boston. She gave a keynote in the last Rails.
I'm not sure.
And she gave a talk about. We used to talk about which companies are still on Rails or were built on Rails, like Twitter, for example, Shopify, GitHub, etc. Then she said, think about the startups that are building on Rails. Because there are a lot of startups out there that no one knows about that are still building on Rails. So she gave that talk, but her I guess her thesis was, guys, come on, she's one of those evangelists, and I guess it's everybody in RailsConf. Let's start building on Rails again. It's a perfect platform for you to build your startup because it's super easy to build on, and it's fairly mature now for most of us.
Yeah, and there's always new stuff and just so much out of the box that you can work with. Would you like to talk about with your blog article? Would you like to talk about is your great grandfather, right?
Oh yeah.
We don't have to, but if you wanted to.
Not really. I don't know how we can segue into that.
Okay. How about blogging then?
Okay.
Do you do other blogs before the one you've got up on Medium right now?
Oh yeah. Well, I had a couple of blogs I tried, but I guess I wrote about my great grandfather, for example, because I had encountered. It's a story. The story was in the blog, but somebody shared with me that letter. And they're like, okay, maybe I should write about this. And I just did. And that's how blogging really is, or what it really is. You just have something in your head and you want to dump it into an article whether for posterity, for other people to see, for a small circle, or for the world to see. It doesn't matter. You just get out there and start banging on your keys and in writing an article. I wrote about different things. I wrote about data. I wrote about there's an article that was related to that, which when I heard a podcast about people that composed the national anthem in the Philippines and how it was different parts of it was lifted from different songs, different arrangements, and around the same time, because my great grandfather was also a composer.
Mm-hmm. Musical composer.
Yeah, he's a band composer, he's a band leader, he's part of the Philippine Constabulary Band, which has the reputation of they went to the States for a concert and they performed, I think, in Washington D.C. and the lights went out at the middle of the performance, and while it was pitch black, they continued on throughout the entire movement and until the lights came on. So they're known for that. There's this bit of trivia, and he was part of that. He was not the band leader then. Yeah, he was part of it.
What was his instrument?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. But then he became one of the prominent band leaders in Las Piñas, in Philippine Constabulary. So he's known for that. It's called Maestro Fajardo. That's why I sort of like wrote about that podcast, what the podcast wanted to explain in relation to my great grandfather's own compositions. Because it happened around the same time.
Cool. Are you big on history or
I am.
just like okay?
I am. I used to read a lot. I absorb a lot of information, especially when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also from my own family doing genealogy.
Okay.
I've got this huge family tree of the Fajardo side and my mother's side, the Salo side, and my paternal grandmother Boza side. So I'm into that.
Cool. So as my last question, one thing I like to do is I like to have a couple quotations from different people and see what you think about the juxtaposition.
Okay.
So I've selected one from Bonifacio and one from Mabini.
Right.
Yeah. So Bonifacio, he said, "The only true conquerors are those who carry the torch of knowledge and spread it." And then Mabini said that true honor is attained by teaching our minds to recognize truth and training our hearts to love it.
Okay. True.
Better to maybe read it.
True honor is attained by teaching our minds to recognize truth and training our hearts to love it. Okay. All right. I believe that. But the second one resonates more for me, which is Bonifacio's quote, which is stronger. Right. It's sort of like much more powerful. It's a call to action also. Only true conquerors are those who carry the torch of knowledge and spread it. I truly believe that.
Okay. Yeah, I figured. Those felt like a nice open source or like building in the open source.
Right, and you know what they say, right? When you teach, two people learn.
Yeah.
We're always learning all the time. And like now, when we have this conversation, it's not, none of it is scripted, none of it is preconceived, but it's all, distilling your mind, massaging your mind, and then suddenly things come out of it that I never expected to come out.
Right.
And so that's I like doing that. I like bouncing from me to try to solve a solution. It's nice to be talking to another person and just throwing out information, and eventually both of you will come up with a solution.
Yeah. Yeah, and like in the same way that writing code, like it sort of rewires your brain to be thinking about the solution,
right.
Understanding the problem better, and
plus pair programming.
Yeah, yeah, good extreme programming practices. Yeah. Do you have anything coming up in Launch Garage or Proudcloud or QBO or Ideaspace that people should hear about?
Well, especially QBO. We're doing a lot of stuff with some accelerated programs. We're actually about to start our own our annual cohort 12, and I think we've done a call for applications already. So if anyone's interested, just go to our website and look at our social pages. We've got all the details there. We're on Facebook, Instagram, X, and just watch out for us as we travel the country and then try to create and look for more founders. Ideaspace, yeah, I mean, we're still doing investments. Watch out for something new that I'm trying to cook up. It's still under wraps, but soon to emerge from it. Launch Garage has a lot of founders mixers anyway. That'll probably be the next couple of months.
Great. Cool. Well, I think that's it for me. My little tagline is Tule Tule Lang. It was very nice chatting with you, and thank you for your time. And I think the listeners will have lots of inspiration out of this also. So
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
okay.